In this video, we're actually going to look at how we calculate the inflation rate. Now, the inflation rate is really just the rate of change in the CPI index. And that might be the CPI index with excluded items, or it could be the rate of change of the trimmed mean or the weighted median. Okay, inflation is just the rate of change between those index numbers. Now, we're calculating, or the dot point is calculate relevant economic indicators using real or hypothetical data. We're obviously calculating inflation rates because we're looking at the goal of price stability, but this dot point could apply to full employment goal, where you'd have to calculate the labour force participation rate, unemployment rate, the underutilisation rate. It could also apply to the strong and sustainable growth goal, where you'd have to calculate the real GDP rate, or the rate of growth in real GDP. All right, so what are the inflation rates that you need to be thinking about? Putting aside for now that we've looked at the different ways of measuring the CPI, we'll just forget that for now and we'll just think about calculating the rate of growth or the rate of change. So we want to do two things. First of all, we need to do the annual rate and the quarterly rate. And the easy part about this is that we use the same formula. Just remember that a quarter is from January to March, March to June, June to September, September to December. And remember how sometimes they're mentioned as the quarter ending March or the quarter January to March. Okay, so to calculate the quarterly rate, we use the same formula. It's the index at the end of the period minus the index at the start of the period, and then we divide it by the index at the start of the period. Okay, so then to turn that into a percentage, we times it by 100. Okay, we use this for annual rate. It's just that it would be price at the start of the price index at the end of the year less price index at the start of the year. So this could be January 2019, and this could be January 2020, and that same formula. Now the tricky thing is sometimes economists use quarterly rates and they turn them into annualized rates. The reason they do that is annual rates and quarterly rates are the price data in the past. So we can only measure the prices that changed in the past. And annualized rates is actually looking forward. Okay, so if we get a quarterly rate and for up until, let's say right now we're in March, if we get the quarterly rate up until March, well, an economist might want to think, well, what would be the annualized inflation rate over the next year? Now, the way we calculate that is we just times it by 4 because there's 4 quarters. Amazing stuff. Another example, so if inflation was 0.5% in the December quarter and we wanted to annualize that, we just times it by 4, and the annualized rate would be 2%. Okay, we use annualized rates also when we get quarterly GDP figures. Okay, we might want to turn a quarterly figure of GDP or real GDP growth into an annualized figure. All right, so back to our indexes. Here are our indexes here, and remember, here's our formula for calculating the change in those indexes or the inflation rate, same thing. And I want you to pause and do these now. I'm asking for the annual inflation rate, the quarterly inflation rate for the quarter ended June, and an annualized inflation rate for the quarter ended June. Sorry, that's a bit all over the place, but you get it now. Pause and calculate. Okay, let's have a look at how we did this. So the annual rate, we use this formula, price index at the end of the period, which is 104, minus price period at the start of the period, which is 100. Basically, that says it increased by 4 index points, from 100 to 104. Forgetting how the index is calculated for now. Remember, the index is designed to make it really simple to calculate inflation. And the kind of questions that you're going to get on an exam are like this. You should actually just be able to look at that and say, well, from 100 to 104, that's increased by 4 from 100. So what's 4 as a percentage of 100? 4%. Okay, remember, you don't have a calculator. If we wanted to work out the June quarter, same deal. Remember, the start of the period was 100. So it's 101 minus 100, which means it's increased by 1 as a percentage of 100 is 1%. There's the formula there if you want to do the maths. And also we have to times it by 100 to get it into a percentage. Now, in order to annualize that, you just times it by 4. So it's 1% times 4. The annualized for the June quarter, that should say, sorry, that's a mistake, it's 4%. Okay, that's what it says there, June quarter. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to separate the CPI and the index number from the rate of growth or the inflation rate? The reason is sometimes students make this mistake. I'll ask them, what's happened to prices over the last year? Oh, that's really easy, Mr. Vellon. Look at that. That trend is downwards. Prices have decreased. Same thing happens sometimes in GDP, the rate of GDP growth. In fact, that's not correct, which I'm hoping all of you know, because no, prices haven't prices haven't decreased. It's just the rate of growth in prices, or the inflation rate, has decreased. So it's decreased from 2% to 1.5%. Prices are still increasing by 1.5%. Okay, so you don't want to make that mistake between the inflation rate and the index number. All right, so that's how we calculate it. Plenty of examples for you to go off and do in your own time, but really just the 3 rates there.